She was divorced for being barren and left to die at a bus stop. Then a vampire's daughter took her hand and said, "You're my mother now." The November rain fell like judgment, cold and relentless, turning the roadside shoulder into rivers of mud that swallowed everything they touched. A single street lamp flickered overhead, casting sickly yellow light across the weathered bus shelter that offered no real protection from anything. On the metal bench inside, a woman sat with her bare feet pressed against wet pavement, her body folded around a manila envelope clutched to her chest like a shield that had already failed. Her brown dress, once modest and neat, now clung to her skin, soaked through and heavy. A leather purse sat open beside her, empty except for lint and a single crumpled receipt. Her shoes were gone, sold to a pawnshop 3 towns back for bus fare she'd never used. Her suitcase was gone too, stolen while she'd slept on a different bench 2 nights ago. Her breath came in shallow, shaking gasps. Her fingers, pale and trembling, gripped the envelope so tightly the paper had begun to tear at the edges. Inside were divorce papers, signed and finalized. A marriage license with a red stamp across it that read dissolved. And a single sticky note in her ex-husband's handwriting, 7 years, Melissa. 7 years of failure. You're barren, broken, and I'm done. Her name was Melissa John. She had stopped thinking of it as hers 4 days ago when her husband, ex-husband, had screamed it at her like an accusation, a curse, a sentence already carried out. Melissa the defective. Melissa the barren. Melissa who couldn't even do the one thing women are supposed to do. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me through our trying times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The words still echoed in her skull, sharper than the cold rain, deeper than the ache in her bones. He had handed her the divorce papers across their kitchen table, her kitchen table, the one she'd picked out, the one where she'd served him 7 years of meals and told her she had 24 hours to be gone. His new girlfriend was already pregnant. 3 months along. See, Melissa? It wasn't me. It was always you. You're the broken one. The envelope had been accompanied by a check for $500. For your trouble, he'd said, as if 7 years of marriage, of trying, of monthly disappointments and doctor's visits and his increasing coldness could be paid off like a utility bill. That had been 4 days ago. The money was already gone, spent on a motel room she couldn't afford for more than 2 nights, on food she couldn't keep down, on the pawnshop transaction that had traded her wedding ring and her dignity for $73. She had walked. She had taken buses that dropped her in towns she didn't recognize. She had kept moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant drowning. Now she sat at this forgotten bus stop on a rural highway where no buses ran after dark, and she had finally stopped moving. She couldn't cry anymore. The tears had dried up somewhere around hour 48, leaving only a hollow ache behind her eyes that no amount of rain could wash away. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her vision blurred at the edges. The cold had seeped so deep into her bones that she barely felt it anymore. It was almost comfortable now. Soft. Gentle, even. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. Barren. Broken. Failure. Across the highway, headlights appeared through the rain, growing brighter. A semi-truck, moving fast, its engine a low roar that vibrated through the ground. Melissa watched it approach. Her legs tensed. It would be easy. It would be quick. It would finally end the loop of worthlessness that played on repeat in her mind. You're defective, Melissa. You couldn't give me a child. What good are you? What's the point of you? Her bare feet pressed harder against the cold pavement. The truck was closer now. 50 yards. 40. 30. She stood. Her legs shook, but she forced herself upright. The rain plastered her hair to her face. The envelope fell from her hands, scattering papers across the wet concrete. She took one step toward the road. Then another. This is how it ends. Then the air changed. The rain didn't stop, but it shifted, falling around her instead of on her, creating a circle of strange stillness in the downpour. The temperature dropped so suddenly her breath crystallized in front of her face. The street lamp overhead flickered once, twice, then blazed with impossible brightness before shattering in a shower of sparks. Melissa froze, her foot hovering over the white line at the highway's edge. A small hand wrapped around hers. Cold. Impossibly cold. But gentle. "Don't be sad," a child's voice said, clear and calm despite the storm. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Melissa's breath caught. She looked down. A little girl stood beside her, no more than 6 or 7 years old, with white blonde hair that fell in perfect waves past her shoulders and enormous eyes that reflected the broken streetlight like mirrors. She wore a burgundy velvet dress with lace at the collar and cuffs, the kind of clothing Melissa had only seen in historical photographs. The child's skin was alabaster pale, flawless, and she didn't blink against the rain that should have been blinding. "Who?" Melissa's voice cracked. She tried again. "Who are you?" The little girl smiled, a small, tentative expression that looked unpracticed, like she'd learned it from watching others, but had never tried it herself. "I'm Era," she said. "And you're my mother." Melissa's legs gave out. She would have collapsed if not for the sudden presence behind her, solid, immovable, radiating cold that made the November rain feel like bathwater by comparison. "Steady," a man's voice said, low and careful, as hands caught her shoulders and held her upright without pulling her back from the road. Melissa turned her head and saw him, tall, inhumanly tall, wearing a crimson coat that looked like it belonged in a Gothic painting. His face was angular and ageless, beautiful in a way that made her chest ache with something between fear and awe. His hair was dark and pulled back, revealing pointed ears and eyes that glowed faintly red in the darkness. Vampire. The word formed in her mind before rational thought could dismiss it. "My name is Eric Violin," the man said, his voice as smooth and cold as river stones. "And I apologize for the abruptness of this meeting, but my daughter has been searching for you for quite some time." Melissa's gaze snapped back to the little girl, Era, who was still holding her hand with that small, cold grip. The child's eyes were fixed on Melissa's face with an intensity that should have been unsettling, but instead felt like recognition. Like coming home after a journey she couldn't remember taking. "I don't understand," Melissa whispered. Her mind felt sluggish, unable to process what was happening. Vampires. A child calling her mother. The rain still falling around them in that impossible circle of stillness. Era tugged gently on her hand. From somewhere within the folds of her antique dress, the child produced a crumpled piece of paper and pressed it into Melissa's palm. It was a drawing done in crayon with a child's unsteady hand. A woman with brown hair and a brown dress, standing beneath a yellow sun. At the bottom, in careful block letters, were 2 words, "My MOM." "I drew you," Era said softly. "I've been drawing you for weeks. Ever since I saw you in my dreams." Melissa stared at the picture. The woman in the drawing had her hair, her dress, even the small mole on her left cheek that she'd always been self-conscious about. "This is impossible," she breathed. "Perhaps," Eric said from behind her, his hands still steadying her shoulders. "But my daughter has never loved anything in her 200 years of existence. Until she saw you." Melissa didn't move. Couldn't move. The child's hand remained wrapped around hers, cold and steady, an anchor in a world that had tilted sideways into something impossible. 200 years, Melissa repeated, her voice barely audible over the rain. She looked down at Era, searching for some sign that this was a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and despair. But the little girl's eyes were too clear, too present, reflecting a depth of existence that no 6-year-old should possess. Eric's hands slipped from her shoulders, and he moved around to face her properly. In the broken streetlight's dying glow, his features seemed to shift between human and something else entirely, something older than the highway beneath their feet, older than the town sleeping somewhere in the darkness beyond. "My daughter was born into darkness," he said quietly, his red eyes fixed on Melissa with an intensity that should have terrified her but somehow didn't. "Born into a world where emotion is a luxury most of our kind abandoned after the first century. We feel, but distantly. We love, but it fades. It's a mercy, really. Eternity is unbearable otherwise." Era tugged on Melissa's hand again, pulling her attention downward. The child had produced something else from her dress, a leather portfolio, rain-beaded but undamaged. She opened it with careful fingers and held it up. Drawings. Dozens of them. Page after page of crayon and colored pencil sketches, all of the same woman. The same brown hair, the same modest dress, the same small mole on the left cheek. Some showed the woman smiling. Others had her sitting on a park bench, or standing in a kitchen, or reading a book. Each one was labeled in that careful child's handwriting, "My real mom. My mother. Mama. The one I've been waiting for." Melissa's throat closed. Her hands shook as she took the portfolio, flipping through page after page of herself, a version of herself she'd never seen before. A version that looked wanted. Loved. Essential. "She drew the first one 6 weeks ago," Eric said, his voice carrying something that might have been wonder in a creature capable of such things. "I woke to find her in her room, surrounded by art supplies she'd never touched before, crying, actually crying over a picture of a woman she'd never met. I thought she was finally descending into madness. It's what happens to our children when they cannot form attachments. They fade into themselves and never return." Era pressed closer to Melissa's side, her small body radiating that impossible cold. "I saw you in my sleep," the child whispered. "You were sad. So sad. And I wanted to make you not sad anymore. I wanted to," her voice cracked with an emotion too large for her small frame. "I wanted to hug you." Something broke open in Melissa's chest. Not her heart, that had shattered days ago in a kitchen that no longer belonged to her. This was something deeper. Some part of her that had been holding itself together through sheer force of will suddenly let go. "You've been told you're worthless without biological children," Eric said, and there was an edge to his voice now, sharp and cold as winter wind. "That your value as a woman, as a human being, is measured by your ability to conceive. That you are broken because your body wouldn't cooperate with someone else's timeline, someone else's demands." Melissa's fingers tightened on the portfolio. The divorce papers lay scattered and forgotten behind her, already dissolving in the rain. "But my daughter chose you," Eric continued, stepping closer. "Not randomly. Not desperately. She saw something in you that called to whatever remains of her soul. And in 200 years, nothing, nothing, has ever reached her." He paused, studying Melissa's face with those ancient, glowing eyes. "She is dying, Melissa. Not in body, but in spirit. And you are dying in both. I am offering you a choice." From the darkness beyond the broken street lamp, something materialized, a carriage that looked like it had rolled straight out of a Victorian painting, drawn by horses whose eyes reflected red in the dim light. The door stood open, revealing velvet seats and brass fixtures that gleamed despite the rain. "Come with us," Eric said simply. "Through the veil, into our realm. Become what my daughter believes you already are, her mother. Or stay here, in this place where you were told your worth could be measured and found wanting." Era's grip on Melissa's hand tightened. The child looked up at her with eyes that held 2 centuries of loneliness and 6 weeks of desperate hope tangled together. "Please," Era whispered. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Melissa stared at the carriage, at the impossible choice laid before her. Behind her lay the bus stop, the scattered divorce papers, the proclamation of her failure. Before her stood a vampire child who had drawn her face in crayon and called it love. She had nothing left to lose. Nothing left but the weight of worthlessness that had been pressed into her bones like a brand. Melissa John, who had been told she was broken, took her first step toward the carriage. Toward the child whose cold hand held hers with surprising gentleness. Toward a future that made no sense but felt, somehow, like the first true thing she'd encountered in years. "Okay," she breathed. "Take me with you." The crossing felt like drowning in reverse, being pulled up through water that had no surface, through layers of cold and pressure and darkness that peeled away one by one until Melissa's lungs burned with the need to breathe air that tasted of copper and starlight. When the carriage wheels finally struck solid ground, she gasped and opened eyes she hadn't realized she'd closed. The world beyond the windows was impossible. No sun hung in the sky, yet everything glowed with soft luminescence, twilight captured and held indefinitely, neither day nor night, but some eternal in-between. Trees rose around them like cathedral spires, their bark silver and their leaves a deep crimson that seemed to pulse with inner light. The road beneath the carriage wheels was obsidian, polished to mirror brightness, reflecting a sky full of stars that formed constellations Melissa had never seen. And in the distance, dominating the horizon like a mountain made of shadow and ambition, stood the palace. It was carved from black stone that drank the twilight, all sharp angles and soaring towers that pierced the starlit sky. Gothic windows glowed red from within, and bridges of wrought iron connected spires that looked too delicate to support their own weight. Gardens surrounded the structure, flowering vines with blooms like frozen fire, hedges trimmed into geometric perfection, fountains that ran with water so clear it looked like liquid crystal. Era bounced in her seat, a small movement that somehow contained an entire storm of excitement. "That's home," she said, her first words since they'd entered the carriage. "That's where we live." Melissa couldn't find words. Her former apartment, the one she'd shared with her ex-husband, the one she'd been thrown out of, could have fit inside the palace's entry hall 100 times over. The wedding she'd planned so carefully, budgeting every detail, had cost less than what she imagined a single window of that structure might be worth. The carriage rolled through gates that opened without touch, past guards in crimson and black who bowed as Eric's presence was recognized. Servants appeared as they dismounted, pale figures in immaculate livery, who moved with inhuman grace and didn't quite meet Melissa's eyes. One of them, a woman with silver hair braided to her waist, stared at Melissa's muddy bare feet and rain-soaked dress with barely concealed disdain. "Prepare the East Wing guest quarters," Eric commanded, his voice carrying authority that made the servants scatter like startled birds. "And summon the court. We have matters to discuss." Era refused to let go of Melissa's hand as they entered the palace. The interior was even more breathtaking than the exterior, vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow, chandeliers made of black crystal that cast prismatic light, floors so polished Melissa could see her bedraggled reflection staring back at her. Portraits lined the walls, faces pale and beautiful and wrong in subtle ways, their eyes seeming to track movement as the group passed. The quarters she was given made her previous life feel like a distant dream of poverty. The bedroom alone was larger than her entire former apartment, with a canopied bed draped in burgundy velvet, wardrobes of dark wood inlaid with gold, and windows that overlooked those impossible silver forests. A bathroom adjoined it, all marble and brass, with a tub deep enough to swim in and mirrors that reflected the lamplight like captured stars. "This is too much," Melissa whispered, still dripping rain onto carpets that probably cost more than she'd earned in years. Era tugged her toward the wardrobe, which servants had already begun filling with dresses in deep jewel tones. "You need pretty clothes," the child said firmly. "Mama should have pretty things." The word mama hit Melissa like a physical blow. She sank onto the edge of the enormous bed, her legs finally giving out completely. Era climbed up beside her, still holding her hand, those ancient eyes studying Melissa's face with concern that looked bizarre on features so young. "Are you still sad?" Era asked softly. Before Melissa could answer, voices echoed from somewhere deeper in the palace, cold, elegant voices discussing her presence with varying degrees of skepticism and disdain. The court, Melissa realized. They were gathering to judge her. Eric appeared in the doorway, having changed into formal attire that made him look even more like something out of a Gothic painting. "They're ready for you," he said. "I apologize in advance for their manner. The court has existed for millennia. They do not adapt well to change." The throne room was a cathedral of shadow and crimson light. Vampires filled the space, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all pale and beautiful and radiating that same ancient coldness that Eric carried. They stood in clusters, their conversations dying as Melissa entered with Era still clinging to her side. A woman in a gown of black lace stepped forward, her eyes like chips of amber ice. "This is the mortal?" Her voice dripped disdain. "This bedraggled creature is what has captured our princess's attention." Era's hand tightened on Melissa's. The child's face, so soft moments before, went cold and still. "She's my mother," Era said, her voice carrying a weight that made several vampires step back. "And you will be nice." A ripple of shock moved through the court. Someone gasped, an actual gasp, from creatures who supposedly felt nothing. "She speaks," a man murmured from the back. "The princess speaks with emotion." "Impossible," another voice whispered. "She hasn't shown effect in decades." But Era wasn't finished. She pressed closer to Melissa, her small face tilting up with an expression of such pure, unguarded affection that the entire court seemed to freeze. "Will you read to me tonight, Mama?" the child asked. "I found a book about stars. Real stars, not vampire stars. I want to know about them." Then, impossibly, miraculously, Era smiled. Not the tentative, unpracticed expression from the bus stop, but a real smile that transformed her entire face, making her look like the child she should have been all along. The silence in the throne room was absolute. A figure emerged from the shadows, ancient beyond reckoning, draped in robes of deep purple, with eyes that glowed silver instead of red. The court parted before her like water before a ship's prow. "I am Ceres," the woman said, her voice like whined through empty crypts. "Healer to the court. And I would examine this mortal who has accomplished what 2 centuries could not." Her gnarled hands were surprisingly gentle as they took Melissa's wrist, pressing cold fingers against her pulse point. Ceres's silver eyes went distant, unfocused, seeing something beyond the physical. When she spoke again, her voice carried wonder that made even Eric straighten with attention. "Lifebringer," Ceres breathed. Dormant, untrained, barely aware of itself, but present nonetheless. "This mortal carries magic so rare we believed it extinct." She released Melissa's wrist and turned to address the stunned court. "She can heal curses written into the soul itself. She can mend what was thought permanently broken." The healer's gaze found Era, still pressed against Melissa's side. The princess recognized it instinctively, called to it across the veil. "This woman is not Barren, my lords and ladies." Ceres's smile was sharp and cold and triumphant. "She is perhaps the most fertile being in either realm, fertile with magic that births healing instead of flesh." The first night, Melissa sat on the edge of Era's enormous canopied bed, black silk and silver embroidery, fitting for a vampire princess, and realized she had no idea how to be a mother to a 200-year-old child who had never been tucked in before. Era perched against the pillows in a white nightgown that made her look even more ethereal, clutching the book about stars she'd mentioned earlier. Her pale eyes watched Melissa with an intensity that felt like being studied by something ancient and hungry, except the hunger wasn't for blood. It was for something Melissa barely understood herself. Melissa's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "My mother used to read to me at bedtime. Would you like that?" Era nodded, A single sharp movement, and thrust the book forward with hands that trembled slightly, as if she was afraid Melissa might refuse. As if this simple act of care was so foreign it bordered on miraculous. Melissa opened the book, found the first page, and began to read about constellations and cosmic dust and the birth of light from darkness. Her voice shook at first, rusty from days of silence broken only by sobs, but it steadied as she continued. Era leaned closer with each paragraph, until her white blonde head rested against Melissa's shoulder, cold, yes, but also solid and real, and there. When Melissa finished the third chapter, she glanced down and found Era's eyes closed. Her small face relaxed in something that looked almost like sleep. Almost like peace. "She won't actually sleep," Eric's voice said softly from the doorway, making Melissa jump. "Our kind doesn't need it. But she's resting. I haven't seen her rest in 50 years. Melissa carefully extracted herself from Era's grip, tucking the vampire child beneath covers she didn't need, smoothing hair that felt like spun glass beneath her fingers. The maternal gestures came unbidden, muscle memory from a life she'd imagined but never lived, nursery fantasies built during 7 years of negative pregnancy tests and her ex-husband's increasing coldness. "You're barren, Melissa. What kind of woman can't even do this one basic thing?" She pushed the thought away and followed Eric into the corridor, where moonless twilight spilled through tall windows. He looked different somehow, less like a Gothic painting come to life, and more like a father who'd been holding his breath for 2 centuries and had finally been allowed to exhale. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I know those words are inadequate, but I don't have better ones." Melissa wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how the borrowed nightgown, silk and lace, far too fine for someone like her, hung on her frame. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "I've never been a mother. I failed at even becoming one." "You're being one now," Eric said simply. "That's all that matters." The days that followed developed a rhythm that felt like learning a new language, one made of small gestures and tentative affections. Melissa braided Era's hair each morning, her fingers learning the texture of it, discovering that vampire hair tangled just like human hair despite its ethereal appearance. Era sat perfectly still during these sessions, her eyes closed, making small sounds of contentment that sounded startlingly like purring. "My courtiers used to do this," Era said one morning, her voice distant with memory. "But they were afraid of me." Their hands shook. "You're not afraid." Melissa's fingers paused in their weaving. "Should I be?" "No." Era's hand found Melissa's knee, squeezing gently. "You're my mama. Mamas aren't supposed to be afraid." The words settled in Melissa's chest like stones, heavy and solid and anchoring her to something she couldn't quite name. She taught Era to play games she half remembered from her own childhood, simple things like patty cake and peekaboo that made the ancient vampire child dissolve into giggles that echoed through the palace halls like bells. The first time Era laughed, really laughed, her whole body shaking with it, servants dropped trays and courtiers stopped mid-conversation to stare in wonder. Saris appeared regularly to observe them, her silver eyes tracking every interaction with clinical precision. "The curse is unwinding," the healer announced after the 4th day. 2 centuries of emotional starvation, reversing itself one maternal touch at a time. Extraordinary. But it wasn't just Era who was changing. Melissa felt something shifting in herself too, some hollow space filling drop by drop with purpose. When Era's small hand slipped into hers during walks through the silver forests, when the child pressed her cold face against Melissa's neck seeking comfort from a nightmare, when Era's eyes lit up at the sight of Melissa entering a room. These moments built something solid where there had only been worthlessness before. Eric watched them with an expression Melissa couldn't quite read. He appeared during their activities with increasing frequency, standing in doorways, sitting nearby during story time, his red eyes softening in ways that seemed to surprise even him. "You're healing her," he said one evening, finding Melissa alone in the library where she'd been searching for more books Era might enjoy. The curse that made her incapable of attachment, it's breaking apart. Sarah says she's never seen anything like it. Melissa ran her fingers along leather spines, not meeting his gaze. I'm not doing anything special. I'm just being there. Showing up. That's more than anyone has done for her in 200 years. Eric moved closer, and Melissa caught the scent of him, something like winter wind and old books and copper. More than anyone has done for many of us, truth be told. There was something in his voice that made Melissa look up. His face, usually so controlled and unreadable, held a vulnerability that seemed wrong on features so powerful. Thank you, he said again. For not running. For staying. For seeing my daughter as something other than a cursed creature to be pitied or feared. Melissa's throat tightened. She chose me, she whispered. Your daughter looked across the veil and decided I was worth searching for. No one has ever. She couldn't finish. The words tangled in her chest with all the old poison her ex-husband had poured into her. You're worthless, Melissa. Broken. Defective. What good are you? Has ever what? Eric prompted gently. Wanted me, Melissa finished, her voice barely audible. No one has ever wanted me this much. This, completely. And I keep waiting for it to end. For her to realize I'm not special, that I'm just the barren woman who couldn't even keep her human husband interested, and... Stop. Eric's hand caught her chin, tilting her face up with surprising gentleness. His eyes glowed in the library's dim light, ancient and knowing. My daughter doesn't make mistakes. Not about this. She saw something in you that called to her cursed soul. Something powerful enough to break 2 centuries of isolation. His thumb brushed across her cheek, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You are not broken, Melissa. You were never broken. You were simply planted in soil that couldn't nurture what you had to offer. The words hit like physical blows, not painful, but stunning in their impact. Melissa's breath caught. From somewhere in the palace, Era's voice called out, Mama? Where are you? I found another star book. The sound, pure joy, untainted by the flatness that had characterized Era's voice when they'd first met, made Eric's expression transform into something that looked almost like hope. You should go, he said softly, releasing Melissa's chin. Your daughter is calling. Your daughter. Not my daughter. Not the daughter. Your daughter. Melissa left the library, following Era's voice through corridors she was still learning, and tried desperately to believe, that maybe, impossibly, she might not fail at this after all. The training chamber existed in the palace's deepest level, where the stone walls seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat and the air tasted of copper and ancient magic. Saris had led Melissa down spiraling stairs that descended far longer than should have been physically possible, past chambers whose purposes Melissa didn't want to contemplate, until they reached a circular room lit by floating orbs of silver light. Sit, Saris commanded, gesturing to a cushion placed at the room's center. The healer moved like wind through grass, fluid and inevitable, arranging candles in patterns that hurt to look at directly, their flames burning colors that didn't exist in the mortal spectrum. Melissa sat, her borrowed dress pooling around her. 2 weeks in the vampire realm, and she still felt like an imposter wearing someone else's life. The gowns the servants brought her were beautiful, deep emeralds and rich burgundies, fabrics that whispered against her skin, but they belonged to someone important. Someone worthy. Not a divorced woman who'd been thrown away for being defective. Your thoughts betray you, Saris said without looking up from her candle arrangement. You believe yourself unworthy of the power you carry. This belief will strangle your magic before it can properly wake. I don't feel powerful, Melissa admitted quietly. I feel like I'm pretending. Playing dress-up in a world where I don't belong. Saris's silver eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made Melissa want to look away. The Lifebringer gift chooses its vessels with precision beyond mortal understanding. It did not choose you despite your perceived flaws. It chose you because of what you have survived. Your capacity for love was not diminished by those who refused to receive it. It was refined. Concentrated. made into something pure enough to break curses that have existed for millennia. The healer knelt before Melissa, taking both her hands. Saris's touch was cold like all vampires, but there was something else beneath it, a thrumming vibration that resonated in Melissa's bones. "Close your eyes," Saris instructed. "Breathe." Not the shallow breathing of anxiety, but deep breaths that reach your center. "Good. Now tell me, what do you feel?" Melissa wanted to say nothing or foolish or like I'm wasting your time, but she forced herself to focus. To actually feel instead of spiraling into self-doubt. And there, beneath her sternum, like a seed waiting for spring, something warm pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. "There's something," Melissa whispered. "It feels like sunlight. But inside me." "Yes." Satisfaction colored Saris's voice. "That is your core. Your well of power. It has been dormant your entire life, waiting for the right catalyst to wake it. Now reach for it. Not with your hands, with your intention. Call it forward." Melissa tried. The warmth flickered, responding to her attention like a shy animal being coaxed from hiding. It grew brighter, hotter, spreading from her center outward until her skin felt incandescent. "Open your eyes." Melissa did. Her hands glowed, actually glowed, with golden light that pulsed and swirled like liquid sunshine. The light didn't hurt to look at despite its brightness. Instead, it felt like coming home after a long journey through darkness. "This is what you are," Saris said softly. "A life-bringer. A healer of the incurable. A breaker of curses written in blood and despair. Your ex-husband called you barren because you could not give him children. But Melissa, you give life itself. Not through creating new beings, but through mending those already broken. Through offering hope where none existed. This is not a lesser gift. It is perhaps the greatest gift existence offers." Tears streamed down Melissa's face, hot against her cheeks. The golden light intensified, responding to her emotion, and for the first time since her husband had handed her those divorce papers, she felt something other than worthless. They trained for hours. Saris taught her to sense life energy, the way it moved through living things like rivers of light, the places where it pooled or stuttered or went dark. She learned to channel her power deliberately instead of letting it leak out unconsciously. She discovered that her magic responded strongest when she thought of Era, that the mere image of the vampire child's face made her power surge like a mother lifting a car off her trapped baby. "Maternal instinct amplifies your gift exponentially," Saris observed, making notes in a leather journal. "It's why the princess's curse recognized you across the veil. It sensed what you are, a mother whose love has nowhere to go, meeting a daughter whose curse prevents her from receiving love." Two broken pieces that fit together perfectly. On the 5th day of training, Saris brought Era to the chamber. The child looked uncertain, pressing close to Melissa's side with unusual timidity. "The healer says you're going to help me," Era said quietly. "That your magic can break my curse." Melissa knelt, bringing herself to Era's eye level. The vampire child's face was pale even by vampire standards, her eyes too large and ancient for her small features. But when she looked at Melissa, something in them softened, became young and hopeful and scared. "I'm going to try," Melissa said honestly. "I don't know if I'm strong enough yet, but I'll try as hard as I can. Is that okay?" Era nodded and took Melissa's hands. "You're my mama," she whispered. "Mamas can do anything." The trust in those words nearly broke Melissa. She closed her eyes, reaching for that core of warmth inside herself, calling it forward with everything she had. The golden light blazed to life, brighter than it ever had before, flowing from her hands into Era's small body. She could see it now, see the curse the way Saris had taught her. It wound through Era like black thorns, choking off the pathways where emotion should flow, strangling the capacity for warmth and connection and love. 2 centuries of isolation made tangible, made visible, made into chains that wrapped around a child's heart. Melissa's power pushed against the curse like fingers working at a knot. It resisted, ancient and stubborn, but her magic burned brighter. She thought of Era's laugh. Era's smile. The way the child's face lit up when Melissa entered a room. The small cold hand that reached for hers during walks through the silver forest. My daughter, Melissa thought fiercely. You will not have my daughter. The curse screamed, she felt it, a psychic wail of rage, and then a layer of it shattered. Crumbled away like ash caught in wind. Era gasped. Mama, the child breathed, her eyes flying open. I feel, Mama, your hands are warm. It was such a small thing. Such an insignificant detail. But Era was staring at their joined hands with wonder that transcended her 2 centuries of existence, her whole body trembling. I've never felt warmth before, Era whispered. Never. Everything has always been cold. But you're warm. You're so warm and it's. Era started crying. Real tears, streaming down her alabaster cheeks, her small body shaking with sobs that sounded like they'd been trapped for 200 years. She launched herself at Melissa, small arms wrapping tight around her neck, face pressed against Melissa's shoulder. Mama, Era sobbed. My mama. You're real. You're really real and warm and here, and you're not going to leave me, are you? Please don't leave me. Please. Melissa held her daughter, and felt something fundamental shift in her chest. Some last wall she'd been holding around her heart crumbled away completely. Never, Melissa whispered into Era's white blonde hair. I'm never leaving you. I promise. And for the first time in her life, Melissa believed she might actually be enough. Just as she was. Exactly as she was. The letter arrived on black parchment sealed with wax the color of dried blood. A raven had delivered it to the palace gates at dusk, dropping it at the feet of the guards before disappearing into the twilight sky with a cry that sounded too much like laughter. Eric brought it to Melissa while she sat in the library with Era, the 2 of them curled together on a velvet settee reading about constellations. The Vampire King's face was carved from stone, his red eyes blazing with barely contained rage. What is it? Melissa asked, her hand instinctively tightening on Era's shoulder. Eric didn't answer immediately. He simply handed her the letter, his jaw clenched so tightly she could hear his teeth grind together. The handwriting was familiar. Horrifyingly, sickeningly familiar. Melissa. I've recently learned some interesting information about your new circumstances. The Barren failure I divorced has apparently become quite valuable, essential, even to the Vampire King himself. Funny how things work out. I made a mistake letting you go so cheaply. $500 and a divorce decree? That was poor business on my part. Clearly, you're worth much more than I realized. I'm prepared to correct this error. I'll be seeing you soon to discuss terms of your return. After all, you're still my wife in the eyes of God, regardless of what some legal paperwork says. What's mine remains mine. Regards, Marcus John. The paper crumpled in Melissa's fist. Her entire body had gone cold, then hot, then cold again. The golden warmth she'd been learning to control flickered erratically under her skin, responding to the spike of fear and rage coursing through her. He can't, Melissa whispered. He can't just, I'm not his anymore. He threw me away. He called me worthless and told me I had 24 hours to disappear from his life, and now he wants to. Era pressed closer, her small face tilted up with concern. Who, Mama? Who wants to hurt you? No one is going to hurt her, Eric said, his voice carrying a weight that made the library's shadows deepen. I've tripled the palace guard. Saris is warding every entrance. Your ex-husband is a mortal fool who doesn't understand what he's threatening to touch. But Melissa couldn't stop staring at the letter. At the casual possessiveness in Marcus's words. What's mine remains mine, as if 7 years of marriage followed by abandonment gave him eternal claim over her. As if the life she'd built here, the daughter she'd found, the purpose she'd discovered, the magic she was learning to wield, was something he could simply reclaim because his greed had been activated. He knows about my magic, Melissa said, her voice shaking. Someone told him what I am. What I can do. Which means he's made allies, Eric said grimly. Mortal informants don't discover vampire realm activities without supernatural assistance. Someone helped him find this information. Someone who wants access to Lifebringer power badly enough to work with a human. The attack came 3 nights later. Melissa woke to the sound of breaking glass and Era's scream, sharp and terrified in a way the vampire child's voice should never sound. She was out of bed before conscious thought engaged, her bare feet hitting cold stone as she ran toward Era's chambers. The corridor twisted with shadows that moved wrong, that reached and grasped with fingers made of smoke and malice. The air tasted of copper and burnt sugar, magic, dark and hungry, contaminating the palace's atmosphere. Era's door hung open, splintered at the hinges. Inside, 3 figures loomed over the vampire child's bed, women in tattered robes stained with substances Melissa didn't want to identify. Their faces were painted with symbols that hurt to look at directly, and their hands dripped with something black and viscous that sizzled when it hit the floor. Blood witches. Melissa recognized them from descriptions Saris had provided during training. Practitioners of the darkest magic, who drew power from pain and sacrifice and corruption. One of them had Era pinned to the bed, a hand clamped over the child's mouth. The vampire princess thrashed, her supernatural strength seemingly negated by whatever enchantment coated the witch's skin. Got her, the witch hissed, her voice like grinding glass. The brat that called the Lifebringer across the veil. She'll make excellent bait if the mother tries to run. Something inside Melissa detonated. She didn't think. Didn't plan. Didn't reach for her power the careful way Saris had taught her. She simply exploded with golden light that turned the bedroom into a miniature sun. The Lifebringer magic erupted from every pore, from her eyes and mouth and fingertips, raw and furious and absolutely uncontrolled. It slammed into the blood witches like a physical force, stripping away their dark enchantments in layers that peeled off like burning paper. They screamed a high, terrible sounds that barely registered as human, as her power purged the corruption from their bodies. The witch holding Era released her and stumbled backward, her painted symbols smoking and blackening against her skin. "Impossible," she gasped. "No Lifebringer should have this much raw power. They need training, focus, control." "Get away from my daughter," Melissa heard herself say, except her voice didn't sound like hers anymore. It resonated with harmonics that made the palace stones vibrate, echoing with power that felt older than the building around them. She advanced into the room, each step leaving glowing footprints on the floor. The golden light streaming from her hands had coalesced into something almost solid, radiant shields that expanded outward, forcing the blood witches toward the shattered window. One of them tried to fight back, hurling a bolt of dark magic that looked like congealed shadow. Melissa's power met it in midair and consumed it, breaking apart the curse work and converting it into harmless sparks that dissipated like fireflies. "We were told she was newly awakened," another witch snarled, backing toward the window. "Weak. Untrained. This is a mother protecting her child," Saris's voice said from the doorway, cold and satisfied. "There is no force in existence more powerful than that. Your employer failed to mention this detail, I suspect." The blood witches exchanged glances, their painted faces pale beneath the symbols. Then they dove through the broken window, transforming into ravens mid-fall and disappearing into the twilight sky. The moment they were gone, Melissa's power collapsed. She staggered, her legs giving out, but Era was there, small and cold and safe, catching her with strength that belied her size. "Mama," Era sobbed, her face pressed against Melissa's shoulder. "You saved me. You were so bright and strong, and you saved me." Melissa's arms wrapped around her daughter, holding tight while the golden light finally faded from her skin. Her whole body shook with adrenaline and terror and rage. Marcus had sent these creatures. Her ex-husband, the man who'd called her worthless and barren and broken, had allied with blood witches to abduct her, to reclaim her like property, to sell her magic to the highest bidder. Eric appeared in the doorway, his crimson coat disheveled, his eyes blazing red with fury. Behind him, guards filled the corridor, too late to help, but ready for orders. "They're working for him," Melissa said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "For Marcus. He knows what I am now, and he wants to." She couldn't finish. Couldn't voice the horror of being dragged back to the man who'd thrown her away, this time as a commodity instead of a wife. Eric knelt beside them, his ancient face transformed by an emotion Melissa had never seen there before, protective rage mixed with something softer. Something that looked almost like fear at how close they'd come to losing her. "He's declared war," Eric said softly. "And he has no concept of what he started." Era's cold hand found Melissa's, squeezing tight. "You won't let them take her, will you, Papa? She's my mama. Mine. Not his anymore." "No," Eric said, his voice carrying a promise that made the shadows deepen around them. "She belongs to no one but herself. And we will make certain Marcus John understands this truth. Permanently." The new moon came with warnings that rippled through the vampire realm like tremors before an earthquake. The veil between worlds thinned to gossamer, and the palace's wards flickered like candles in a storm. Saris worked without rest, reinforcing magical barriers while Eric mobilized every soldier, every guard, every vampire with combat training. The silver forests emptied as civilians retreated to the palace's innermost sanctums, and the eternal twilight seemed to darken with anticipation. Melissa stood at a tower window, watching the horizon with Era pressed against her side. The child hadn't left her presence since the Blood Witch attack 3 nights ago, following her from room to room with the desperate clinginess of someone who'd finally found something precious and feared losing it. "He's really coming, isn't he?" Era whispered. "The man who hurt you before." "Yes," Melissa said, because lying to her daughter felt worse than the truth. "But he won't take me. I promise you, Era. I'm not going anywhere." The words felt like an oath spoken into the universe itself, binding and absolute. Melissa's life-bringer magic pulsed in response, warming her from within as if sealing the promise with power. They came at midnight, the exact moment when the new moon's absence made the veil most permeable. The attack began with explosions along the outer walls, corrupted magic that ate through Eric's wards like acid through silk. Alarm bells rang throughout the palace, their peals mixing with the sounds of combat as Eric's forces engaged the invaders. Melissa grabbed Era and ran toward the reinforced chamber Saris had prepared, but they didn't make it halfway before the corridor ahead erupted in flames, unnatural fire that burned purple and smelled of sulfur and desperation. Through the smoke, figures emerged. Mercenaries in mismatched armor, their eyes glazed with enchantments that overrode self-preservation. Creatures twisted by dark magic into things that barely resembled their original forms, wolves with too many heads, birds with talons like swords, things that had once been human but weren't anymore. And blood practitioners, dozens of them, their robes stained with sacrifices made to fuel this assault. At the center of the invasion force, directing the chaos like a conductor before an orchestra, stood Marcus John. He looked different than Melissa remembered, better fed, better dressed, wearing expensive clothing that spoke of recent wealth. His hair was styled, his face clean-shaven, his smile sharp with triumph. He'd always been handsome in a conventional way, but now that handsomeness felt like a mask over something rotten. "Melissa." His voice carried over the sounds of battle, false warmth coating every syllable. "There you are. I've been so worried about you, sweetheart. This is all just a big misunderstanding that's gotten out of hand." Eric appeared from a side corridor, his crimson coat torn and splattered with blood that wasn't his own. His eyes blazed with fury that made the air around him shimmer with heat. "You have breached the vampire realm with hostile forces," he said, his voice resonating with centuries of authority. "You have attacked my palace, threatened my people, and attempted to abduct someone under my protection. The punishment for such acts is death." Marcus laughed, actually laughed, the sound bouncing off stone walls. Your protection? She's my wife, vampire. We were married for 7 years. I have legal documents, signed contracts, proof of ownership. I'm not your wife, Melissa said, her voice cutting through his words like a blade. You divorced me. You handed me papers and called me worthless and told me I had 24 hours to disappear. You don't get to come back now and claim ownership. Oh, Melissa. Marcus's expression shifted into something she recognized too well, the patronizing concern he'd always used when asserting control. You're confused. Traumatized. These creatures have clearly manipulated you, taken advantage of your vulnerable state. But I forgive you. Come home, and we'll forget this whole embarrassing episode. He took a step forward, and his mercenaries moved with him, a coordinated advance that pushed Eric's defenders back. The blood practitioners began chanting, their voices weaving enchantments that made the air thick and hard to breathe. I'm offering you a chance to come willingly, Marcus continued, his tone hardening. Before this gets uglier. Before people die because you're being stubborn. You always were stubborn, Melissa. Always thought you knew better than me, even when you kept failing. Failed to get pregnant. Failed to make me happy. And you'll fail at this too, playing mother to some vampire's cursed brat. It's what you do. You fail. The words hit like physical blows, finding every insecurity Melissa had been fighting to overcome. The old fears rose up, whispering in her ex-husband's voice, "You're not enough. You never were. You'll ruin this child just like you ruined everything else." Era's hand tightened in hers, trembling. The vampire child looked up at Melissa with eyes that held 2 centuries of abandonment and 6 weeks of hope, and Melissa saw her daughter's fear, not of the mercenaries or the blood practitioners or even Marcus himself, but of losing the one person who'd chosen to love her. "Please don't go, Mama," Era whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't leave me. I'll be good, I promise. I'll be so good if you just stay." Something crystallized in Melissa's chest. Something that felt like iron forged in fire, unbreakable and absolute. She stepped forward, positioning herself between Era and Marcus. Her Lifebringer magic rose without conscious summoning, golden light beginning to glow beneath her skin. "No," Melissa said simply. Marcus's expression darkened. "No? Melissa, don't be stupid. You're coming with me one way or another. I've invested too much in this retrieval to leave empty-handed. If you won't come willingly, my blood practitioners will." "No," Melissa repeated, louder this time. The golden light intensified, spreading from her core through her limbs, making her skin luminous. "I'm not your wife. I'm not your property. I'm not your failure. I am a Lifebringer. I am a mother. I am someone who was told she was worthless for 7 years, and I'm done believing it." Her power exploded outward in a wave that knocked the mercenaries backward and made the blood practitioners chant stutter into silence. The corrupted creatures howled and retreated, unable to bear the touch of her magic against their twisted forms. "I choose my daughter," Melissa said, her voice resonating with harmonics that made the palace stones sing. "I choose this life. I choose myself. And you, Marcus John, have no power over me anymore." Marcus's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful, after everything I gave you. You gave me nothing but pain," Melissa cut him off. "You took a woman who loved you and broke her down piece by piece until she believed she deserved to die at a bus stop in the rain. But I survived you. I found something you'll never understand, love that doesn't need to control or diminish or destroy. And I will burn anyone who tries to take it from me." The golden light surrounding her condensed, focusing, becoming something sharp and purposeful. Melissa raised her hands, and her Lifebringer magic surged forward, not as healing energy this time, but as pure, protective force. It slammed into Marcus's army like a tidal wave, stripping away enchantments, purging corruptions, breaking curses and dark bindings until the mercenaries collapsed, freed from the compulsions that had driven them here. The blood practitioners screamed and fled, their power unraveling in the face of magic that existed to restore rather than corrupt. The twisted creatures reverted to their original forms, confused, disoriented, but alive and whole. And Marcus stood alone, facing a woman he'd called barren and broken, who now blazed with power he couldn't begin to comprehend. "Go," Melissa said softly. "And if you ever come near my daughter again, I will show you exactly what a Lifebringer can do when someone threatens her child." Eric's hand landed on Marcus's shoulder, gentle in appearance, but the human man crumpled under the Vampire King's grip. "You heard her," Eric said, his voice cold as winter death. "Leave. Now. While I'm still allowing it." Marcus looked between them, Melissa blazing with golden light, Eric's eyes burning red with barely restrained violence, Era clinging to her mother's side, and something in him finally broke. The triumph drained from his face, leaving only impotent rage and fear. The vampire guards dragged him away, back through the damaged walls toward the veil, his protests fading into the distance. Melissa's power finally dimmed, exhaustion crashing over her in waves. She sank to her knees, and Era was there immediately, small arms wrapping around her neck. "You stayed," Era sobbed. "You chose me. You really chose me." "Always," Melissa whispered into her daughter's hair. "I will always choose you." The throne room had become a battlefield. Smoke hung in the air from extinguished fires, and the obsidian floors were cracked where corrupted magic had struck. But the fighting had ceased, Marcus's forces scattered or surrendered, leaving only the human man himself restrained between two of Eric's most powerful guards. He struggled against their grip, his expensive clothing torn and stained, his carefully styled hair disheveled. Melissa stood before him, still glowing faintly with residual Lifebringer energy. Era remained at her side, one small hand clutched in hers. The vampire court had assembled hundreds of pale, ancient faces watching with expressions that ranged from fascination to vindication. "This is illegal," Marcus snarled, his voice hoarse from shouting orders during the failed assault. "You can't just keep me here. I have rights. Melissa is my wife under human law, and that marriage contract gives me." "Nothing," Saris interrupted, stepping forward with a scroll that looked older than the palace itself. "Your human marriage contract has no authority in this realm." But more importantly, the healer's silver eyes fixed on Marcus with clinical interest. "Your marriage was built on deception from the beginning, wasn't it?" Marcus's face went carefully blank. "I don't know what you're—" "Show them," Saris said to Melissa. "Use your gift to reveal what he's hidden." A Lifebringer doesn't just heal bodies, she sees the truth of what lives within them. Melissa's magic stirred at the suggestion, responding to her intention before she consciously directed it. The golden light flowed from her hands toward Marcus, gentle as sunrise, and where it touched him, illusions began to peel away like layers of rotting paint. The first revelation was physical. Marcus's appearance shifted, his jawline softened, his build became less imposing, the expensive cosmetic enhancements he'd purchased with newfound wealth dissolving to reveal the ordinary man beneath. But that was surface level, meaningless compared to what came next. The light penetrated deeper, exposing the magical signatures woven through his body. Dark enchantments. Fertility suppressors. Curse work so subtle it had gone undetected for years. "What?" Melissa's voice cracked. "What is this?" Saris examined the exposed magic with practiced eyes. "Contraceptive curses. Applied repeatedly over a long period. They prevented conception while simultaneously damaging the recipient's reproductive system enough to create the appearance of natural infertility." The healer's voice went cold. "Your ex-husband cursed you, Melissa. Then blamed you for being barren." The throne room erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. Even the vampires, creatures who supposedly felt little, reacted with visceral disgust. Eric's eyes blazed so brightly they cast red shadows across the walls. Marcus tried to pull free, panic flashing across his now ordinary features. "That's not, you can't prove." The evidence is written in your very cells, Sarah said. You sought out blood practitioners 7 years ago, shortly after your wedding. Paid them to curse your wife while making yourself appear virile and unaffected. And when she believed herself defective, believed she had failed you, you discarded her. Only to discover later that the broken woman you threw away possessed magic worth more than you could imagine. Melissa felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. 7 years. 7 years of doctor's appointments and negative pregnancy tests and Marcus's increasing coldness. 7 years of believing she was fundamentally broken, that her body had betrayed her, that she couldn't do the one thing women were supposed to do. And it had all been manufactured. Inflicted deliberately by the man who claimed to love her. You cursed me, Melissa whispered. You made me think I was defective. You destroyed me from the inside out, and then you called me worthless for being exactly what you made me. I needed a wife, not a mother for children I didn't want, Marcus said, his voice taking on a defensive edge now that his schemes had been exposed. You were convenient. Compliant. And when you started asking questions about fertility treatments I couldn't let you pursue, well, divorce was simpler than explanations. Era made a sound low in her throat, not quite a growl but close. Her small face had gone cold with an anger that belonged to someone 2 centuries old. You hurt my mama on purpose. You broke her because you wanted to. She's not your mother, you little. Don't. Melissa's voice cut through his words like a blade. The golden light surrounding her intensified, responding to the rage building in her chest. Don't you dare speak to my daughter that way. Her magic surged, not wild this time, but focused with surgical precision. She could see the marriage contract now, not the physical paper, but the magical bindings it had created, the ties that Marcus believed gave him claim over her. 7 years of manipulation and lies had woven those bindings tight, anchoring them in her self-doubt and his control. Melissa's life-bringer power wrapped around each thread of connection and pulled. The magical contract unraveled like burning string. Every tie snapped, every binding dissolved, every claim Marcus had ever held over her turning to ash and smoke. The sensation was like removing hooks that had been embedded in her soul, painful for a moment, then gloriously, weightlessly free. I was never barren, Melissa said, her voice resonating with power that made the throne room's candles flare brighter. I was simply never meant to be your wife or bear your children. I was meant for this, for her. For Era. For healing what was thought permanently broken. For offering love that doesn't demand anything in return except the chance to be given. She turned away from Marcus, dismissing him as thoroughly as he'd once dismissed her. Her attention fixed on Era, on her daughter, who watched with those enormous eyes that held 2 centuries of loneliness and 6 weeks of hope. Come here, baby, Melissa said softly. Era rushed forward, small arms wrapping around Melissa's waist. The vampire child's face pressed against her mother's stomach, and Melissa could feel the curse still wound through her daughter, thinner now, weaker, but not yet fully broken. Melissa placed her hands on Era's head, her fingers threading through white blonde hair that felt like silk. She reached deep into her well of power, calling forth everything she had. Every ounce of love she'd stored up during 7 years of rejection. Every fragment of hope she'd clung to while sitting at that bus stop contemplating death. Every moment of joy she'd experienced teaching this child to laugh and play and feel. The golden light blazed so brightly that vampires shielded their eyes. It poured from Melissa into Era, seeking out every last thread of the bloodline curse that had stolen 200 years of her daughter's emotional life. The curse fought back, ancient and stubborn, but Melissa's magic was stronger. Fed by maternal love amplified to its highest possible expression, her power burned through the curse like sunlight through fog. She felt the moment it broke completely, a psychic snap that reverberated through the throne room, making the foundations shake. Era gasped, her small body going rigid, and then she started crying. Really crying. Deep, racking sobs that sounded like a dam breaking after holding back an ocean. I feel everything, Era choked out between sobs. Mama, I feel everything. Happy and sad and scared and loved, and it's so much, and it's wonderful, and I love you. I love you so much. Melissa sank to her knees, pulling Era fully into her arms. Her daughter by choice, by magic, by every definition that mattered, clung to her with desperate strength. Behind them, the vampire court erupted in stunned conversation. Saris was making rapid notes in her journal, her hands shaking slightly, the first sign of emotion Melissa had ever seen from the ancient healer. And Eric stood watching with an expression of such profound wonder that he looked almost human. The curse is broken, Saris announced, her voice carrying over the commotion. 2 centuries of bloodline corruption, purged completely. This is... She paused, searching for words. This is unprecedented. Eric moved to stand beside Melissa and Era, his presence a wall of protection at their backs. Let it be known to all assembled, he said, his voice resonating with formal authority, that Melissa John is hereby recognized as mother to the Princess Era, with all rights and protections that title conveys. She is family to the crown. Any threat against her is a threat against the realm itself. The court responded with bows and murmured acknowledgments. Even the most skeptical vampires couldn't deny what they'd witnessed, a human woman wielding power ancient and pure, breaking a curse that had plagued the royal bloodline for generations. And this one. A guard gestured to Marcus, who stood diminished and exposed, all his schemes laid bare. Banish him, Eric said coldly. Strip away any enhancements the blood practitioners gave him. Return him to the human world with nothing but the clothes on his back and a compulsion never to speak of this realm or its inhabitants. Let him live the rest of his mundane life knowing he threw away something precious and tried to reclaim it through force. The knowledge of his failure will be punishment enough. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but the guards were already dragging him away. His voice faded into the distance, impotent and meaningless. Melissa held Era and felt Eric's hand settle gently on her shoulder. Through the throne room's high windows, she could see the silver moon rising, not new anymore, but waxing toward full, its light spilling across the impossible landscape of the vampire realm. I'm not broken, Melissa whispered, speaking to herself as much as to anyone else. No, Eric agreed softly. You never were. Era pulled back just enough to look up at Melissa's face, her eyes, those ancient, ageless eyes, now bright with tears and laughter and love. You're my mama, the child said with absolute certainty. My real mama. Not because of blood, but because you chose me. Because you saw me and loved me and stayed. Always, Melissa promised, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. I will always stay. And, surrounded by vampires in a palace of obsidian and shadow, holding a 200-year-old child who'd finally learned to feel, Melissa John understood her worth for the first time in her life. Not measured by her ability to conceive. Not defined by someone else's demands. But inherent, essential, exactly as she was. A mother. A life-bringer. And finally, truly, completely free. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as can ever imagine. So, do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next.